Hi, everyone. Welcome to another segment on Chapter 8. In the last two segments, we introduced the marginal approach to profit maximization, and we spent a fair bit of time discussing the golden rule, which you kind of see down here. We find the profit maximizing quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So we did that, and we looked at that on a table, and we looked at that graphically. And then in the last segment on the graph, we found the profit maximizing quantity, and then went one step further and could show the profit amount by first calculating average revenue and then multiplying by the quantity we produced. And we also were able to show the break-even points on the graph as well. And then we did an example in a table. In this section, we're going to look at something different called break-even and shutdown prices. And the break-even prices are very, very similar in content or context to the break-even points. But the break-even points refer to the quantities, and this break-even price refers to a price, obviously. So let's take a look at the slides and focus on this. So let's define these two things a little bit more specifically. We mentioned the break-even price. So that's a price at which the firm makes only normal profits or zero economic profits. So they're doing, as well as they would have done in their previous operations. So they're making normal profits. If we take this a little bit further and talk a little bit about losses. So think if you're going to produce and you're making losses, how many losses would you make, or how much loss would you make if you actually shut down but kept your business going? So in other words, if I shut down my business temporarily, I still have to pay my rent, I still have to pay my insurance, I still have to pay my fixed costs, is what we're really saying here. So when you're trying to decide whether to produce it all or not, you want to consider your fixed costs. So even if I'm making losses, as long as I'm covering some of my fixed costs, which I have to cover anyway, it's better to continue production. So think about what we're saying there. Even though I'm making losses from production, as long as I'm covering some of my fixed costs, it's better to keep producing and make those losses. Remember, this is a temporary thing. If you're making losses in the long run, then eventually you're going to shut down. But given day-to-day operations or month-to-month operations, as long as I'm covering some of my fixed costs, even if I'm making a loss, I should continue with production. So that leads into something called the shutdown price. A shutdown price is that price that's just sufficient to cover a firm's variable cost. So let's try and talk about these two things together now. If I hire labor, that's a variable cost. I can sell the product at a certain price, and as long as that price or average revenue covers my labor, then I'm managing to cover my variable costs. If it's a little bit higher than my labor costs, then not only am I covering my labor costs, my variable costs, but I'm also covering some of my fixed costs. So even if I'm making losses, if I'm covering some of my fixed costs, I should keep producing. Okay, so what if I'm not even covering my labor? So I've hired some workers to build Dave's picnic tables, and I sell the picnic tables, and I realize what I get from that doesn't even cover the cost of labor, doesn't even cover the variable costs. So that means not only do I lose a little bit on my variable costs, I lose all the amount of my fixed costs because I have to pay rent and insurance anyway. So a shutdown price is a price that's just sufficient to cover the variable costs. If you don't cover the variable costs, then you temporarily are better off if you shut down, because you'll lose less. You'll only lose your fixed costs. You won't lose that part of the variable costs that you couldn't cover because the price was too low. So let's show these on a graph. The break even and shutdown prices. So the minimum break-even price, or sometimes it's just referred to the break-even price, but really we mean the minimum break-even price, is just where your average total cost is at its lowest. So there's my average total cost. That price of 14 is as low as the price can fall. And if it falls any lower, I'm not even covering my average cost. So I'm certainly not breaking even anymore. However, as we said in the last slide, I still may want to continue to produce, and that depends on whether I'm able to cover some of my fixed costs or not. So if, let's say, the price kept falling and falling and we went down to a price of 8, well, that's called the shutdown price. It's the minimum of the average variable cost. So right at this point here, at a price of 8 on the average variable cost curve, anything below 8, as far as the price received for our product, doesn't even cover our variable costs. So in that case, not only are we losing some of the variable costs that we can't cover, we're also losing all of the fixed costs that we have to pay. That's why it's called the shutdown price. At a price of, say, $7.90 here, we're going to say, that's not even enough to cover our variable costs. So as an owner, I'm going to have to take money out of the savings of the company to cover that. So we're losing on those variable costs that we can't cover, as well as all the fixed costs that we have to pay anyway. So if I choose to shut down, well, then I only have to pay those fixed costs that I have to pay anyway. I don't have to lose on the variable costs. So that is very precisely the explanation of the break-even and the shutdown prices. So as part of a slightly deeper explanation on this, if, for example, I'm down at a price of 8 or just under 8, my shutdown price, say the optimal quantity to produce was 4, because remember, we still go from price to where it equals marginal cost, and we come down and find the optimal production point would be 4 units. If I go between that variable cost all the way up to here, my average total cost, the distance of those green dots vertically on this axis, so it looks like it's about that much down to there, that is my average fixed cost. So this is kind of a deeper awareness of what's going on in the graph. Because if I look at a unit of 4, I go straight up. The first curve I hit is average variable cost. I go, yep, okay, am I covering that or not? And then you determine that. And then I have to continue to go all the way up to the next curve, which is my average total cost. So the distance between those two curves, the average total cost and the average variable cost, that is the average fixed cost, which we're saying we have to pay anyway. And so that might help you understand a little bit more about what's going on these graphs when we're talking about the break-even and shutdown point. Or more precisely, I should say the difference between the break-even price and shutdown price and what they mean specifically. Okay, let's do an example of these where we see them on this graph here, and then I'm going to add other things to it. So we'll do more than just finding the break-even price and the shutdown price. So if we look carefully, it's saying, what is the break-even price? Well, we said that's a price where they just break even. And the lowest break-even price is right here. So if I start at the 140, here I'll make this line a little bit thicker. If I start at 140 and go all the way across, that right there is the break-even price, 140. That's the lowest the price can go, where the firm just breaks even right there, right at the minimum of average cost. And coincidentally, the quantity they'd be producing would be 80. Just as a tangent, if I take 140, find out where it crosses marginal cost and come down, that's the best quantity to produce, 180. But we're trying to show that that's also the break-even price, because it can't go any lower than that for them to break even. So what's the shutdown price? Remember, that's the price where they don't even cover their average variable costs. So if I draw it on here, the shutdown price would be 100. So formally, that's the shutdown price. If the price falls any lower than 100, the firm's not even covering its average variable costs, because the price would be below that minimum. So coincidentally, the quantity produced there would be 60, because if we set the price and go find where it crosses marginal cost and come down, the optimal quantity is 60. But at this price of 100, we have some thinking to do. My argument is at a price of 100, we're just covering average variable costs. So we're just keeping everyone employed. We're just managing to pay their salaries with the amount that we're selling our production with. So in that case, I wouldn't shut down. But what you need to think of, strictly speaking, if the price was $99.99, then we're not quite covering our average variable cost at its minimum there. So in that case, we could argue that we would shut down. So understand, there's a little bit of interpretation on this. At the price of 100, that is the shutdown price, but we may not shut down there if we're covering our salaries. We may choose to just keep production going. So at this quantity of 60, what is our average fixed cost? Well, at this output of 60, I come up to the average variable cost curve, and everything above it, so from there all the way up to the average total cost, all the way up to that line, that amount is my AFC. That's my average fixed cost, right in between average variable and average total. And that's the amount that I have to pay anyway, just to keep the business going. That's my rent and insurance, so to speak. So when this price is at 100, we're just covering our variable costs and we're losing average fixed. If we shut down, well, we lose average fixed because we have to pay that anyway. But if the price falls just below 100 and we keep producing, then I'm losing some on my average variable cost because I can't cover it all, but I'm also losing average fixed. So that's why it's the shutdown point. You lose less money if you go ahead and shut down at that point. Okay, I want to go beyond this example here and help to do a little bit of a review of things. What if the price was 160? So I'll just draw a straight line across at a price of 160. So I'm saying, okay, our price is 160. Well, what is my profit maximizing quantity to produce? Well, for that, I find out where my price is just equal to marginal cost, but I want to find the quantity. I'm going to write a little profit sign there, and that's where price equals marginal cost. Remember, price is the same as average revenue. That's that point right there. So then I go down and I find the optimal quantity to produce would be 90. That's our best possible quantity to produce. So I'm going to go a little further and ask you, well, are we making a profit there? So you need to go to 90 and come up and find what's your average total cost. Well, it's right there. Remember, you can go across to this axis to find those exact numbers. It's about 142. Okay, so fine. Where's my price? Well, it's up at 160. So for sure, I'm making a profit. The price is greater than the average total cost. Price is 160, average total cost is around 142. So I'm making an average profit of about 8 per unit. And I'd multiply that by 90 units to find out my total profit. Okay, I'm going to throw a twist into this. What if I produced 30? Or what if I produced 115? Those are my break-even points. We talked about those earlier. So I'm just going to write BE quantities. Those are my break-even quantities. Up here, we've got the price of 160 crossing the average total cost curve. So that's a break-even point. And over here, we've got the price of 160 crossing the average cost again. So that's another break-even point. This one is 115. The first one was 30. So I just wanted to point that out on this slide so we see a little bit more than what the example's trying to show us. Okay, let's do one more. What if the price in the market was 120? Well, all we have to do is go down and we draw our horizontal line at 120 and we say, yeah, okay, we said the price is 120. What's the optimal quantity to produce? Well, again, we have to find the profit maximizing quantity where price equals marginal cost, or marginal revenue equals marginal cost, which is the same as price in this model. That's where the two of them cross. There's my marginal cost curve. Here's the price of 120. So in this case, my optimal production would be 70. Okay, so if it's 70, am I making a profit or loss? Well, I look at this and I go from 70 up to average variable cost. So I'm covering my average variable cost because price is higher. Then I keep going up to average total cost and I find that average total cost is higher than my price. Average total cost is 140. My price is 120. So my price is less than average total cost. That means I'm making losses. If I'm making losses, should I shut down? And for that, you need to know, is price greater than average variable cost? That's what this slide was first about. Over here, we've got break even and shutdown. And at that quantity of 70, I go up and I see my average variable cost is here. It's about 105, but my price is 120. So that means no, I don't shut down. If I shut down, I'd lose all my fixed costs, which is this full amount here. But by producing, not only am I covering my variable costs, but I'm covering this much of my average fixed cost as well. So I lose less, I lose this remainder by continuing to produce, even though I'm still losing some money. Go back and rewind and have a listen to that one more time. So back to the original question on this slide, what is the break-even price and what is the shutdown price? Break-even, shutdown. There's the break-even. It's the minimum of average cost. So that's 140. And there's the shutdown price. It's the minimum of average variable cost. So the shutdown price is 100. Remember what I said, depending, if it's a multiple choice question, the answer is 100. But if it's a short answer question, you might be able to say, well, at price of 100, we're just covering our variable costs, so we'll keep producing. If the price goes slightly below 100, then we're going to shut down. Okay, so let's take a look at how a firm derives its supply curve. So an individual firm's supply curve, well, all we have to do is take what we know about finding out the optimal quantities. So firms are always going to produce where price equals marginal cost as long as they're covering their variable costs. So as long as the price doesn't fall below the average variable cost. This rule is in play. If it falls below the average variable cost, the firm shut down. So they produce zero. That's the one that gives students the hardest time when they're working in Connect. So I'll put a big star beside this. So when you're doing Connect, you find the optimum quantity where price equals marginal cost, but then the first check, this big red star, is find out whether they're actually covering average variable cost or not. So let's do this. At a price of 45, price equals marginal cost right there, and we'd produce 7 as a small firm. If the price dropped to 35, we'd go where price equals marginal cost, right there, come down, and we'd produce 6, sure. If price dropped to 25, we go where price equals marginal cost, come down and produce 5. Hold on a sec. 5, there's my variable cost, there's my price, there's my average total cost. So average total cost is higher than my price. So I'm losing money. But I still produce because I'm covering some of my average fixed costs with this price of 25. Now what happens if the price drops to 20? Well, I go across And there's where price equals marginal cost. And I think, should I produce 4 or not? Well, at a price of 20, if we're just at the minimum average variable cost, it means we're just covering our cost of labor, our variable costs. So I vote for keeping everyone employed and just keep on going. If the price drops slightly below 20, so let me do that 19.99 again. If the price drops to 19.99, then not only are we losing all of our average fixed costs, but we're losing a penny on our variable costs. So we're losing more by producing. So in this case, if the price dropped to 19.99, I would shut down because we're losing less money by temporarily shutting down and only having to pay our rent. Okay, so everywhere above the average variable cost, the solid green line, that's essentially the supply curve of one firm. So the marginal cost curve is the supply curve of one firm. So just to expand what we were talking about into kind of a slightly advanced state again, if that price is 20, we're right at the minimum of our average variable cost. If I go from that potential quantity of 4 all the way up to my average cost curve, this amount right in between here, I'll try and draw this nice and straight. This amount is my average fixed cost. So I have to pay my fixed costs anyway. So I'm losing that amount by selling output at 20 because my average fixed cost is up here at approximately 32. So make sure you can see that you're losing that average fixed cost. Now, if the price dropped to 19.99, just below, then not only am I losing my average fixed cost, but I'm also losing this little tiny bit of variable costs that I can't cover because the price has dropped below the average variable cost curve. So that's why I shut down. I'd rather lose only the two-headed purple line here, my average fixed costs, than losing that plus the little bit of variable cost that I just can't cover. So let's look at this table and do a couple of quick examples. First, they're just asking us, what's the break-even and shutdown prices? So the break-even price, we know that's the minimum of the average total cost curve. So where is that? Well, we just have to find average total cost and go down to its minimum. And that's our price break even. That's the minimum of the average total cost. So we go there and we find 47.50 and we say, well, if price drops to that, that's our break even. That's the minimum of the average total cost. And then we'll say, well, what's the shutdown price? Well, we determined just in the previous slide that that's the minimum of the average variable cost. So then I just go to the average variable cost and go down until I find its minimum, which is 30. So that's what I call the shutdown price, or what economics calls the shutdown price. That's the minimum of the average variable cost. So taking it from the graph and seeing the picture and understanding how we defined it, that's understandable. Then to try and look at a table like this and actually use that understanding just to go straight to the variable cost curve or the average total cost curve, find their minimums and understand, hey, that's actually the break even and the shutdown price, then it becomes much more clear if you can take it to this stage. In the next slide, we're going to go over some more examples about deciding whether or not we're going to produce the quantity, and that'll depend on whether at that optimal quantity we're going to shut down or not. So before we go there, let's just review this. What are the firm's break even and shutdown prices? Well, the break even is the minimum of the average total cost. There it is. That's the lowest ATC at 47.5, right there. Okay, perfect. And what's the shutdown price? Well, the shutdown is the lowest average variable cost, like we said. So we go to the average variable cost curve, go find its minimum, and the shutdown price is $30. So this last slide in this segment on chapter 8 is probably the most critical as far as your understanding of what we've been talking about so far. So I would suggest you put it on pause, take a minute, get a sip of water, clear your head, and come back and focus on this next little bit we're going to talk about. Okay, so hopefully you took a break and we're back and fresh with a clear head. We're going to ask, what will the firm's output be at a price of 20, at a price of 40, and at a price of 60? So remember, price is the same as average revenue, but we're going to call it price here. And the optimal production, in other words, the optimal quantity that we want to produce. So I'm going to write it right here, quantity, profit, maximizing. The quantity of profit maximization is where price, which is equal to marginal revenue, is equal to marginal cost. So we go now at a price of 20. So I'm going to go, what if price is 20? How much are we going to produce? What's the quantity profit max? Well, we come down and we go, well, price is marginal revenue. And I know we need to find where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. There's our marginal cost, price of 20, right there. That's where price equals marginal cost. Okay, great. What's the quantity? Oh, 2. That's our optimal quantity. Or is it? Well, we always have to ask ourselves, does price cover average variable cost? And I know this gets messy, but do we shut down or produce? Well, price is 20, average variable cost is 30. So we do not produce 2, we produce 0 because we're shutting down. Price doesn't cover average variable cost, so we shut down. Okay, now what if price is 30? Okay, we do the same thing. I come here, I get my pen going. Oops. There we go. So now I want to say, what if the price is 40, what's the optimal quantity? Well, I go right back to this rule. I find out where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. I go down. Notice there's a 40 and there's a 40. Well, marginal cost falls and then rises. We're only ever interested where it's rising. So that's where price equals marginal cost here. Great. That potentially is an output of 4. So I go up here and I say, well, then the best quantity to produce is 4. And then I ask mysteriously, or is it? Well, I have to answer this question. Does price cover average variable cost? Do we shut down or do we produce? Well, price is 40, average variable cost is 32. Hey, that means we're covering our average variable cost, so we don't shut down. So we will produce a unit of 4. So the question mark goes away. That's supposed to be a check mark there. We'll produce a unit of 4, and we're happy with that. Well, are we happy? At a price of 40, I am covering average variable costs, but average total costs is 47. So I'm making losses, but I don't shut down. If I shut down, I'd lose all of my fixed costs, but because price is greater than average variable cost, in this case, I'm covering my average variable costs and some of my fixed costs. So I lose less by continuing to produce, even though I'm still making losses. Okay, let's go on to the next one, where we're going to say, The price is 60. Now what should we do? Well, I'll erase these things here. I'll put in my price of 60 and we'll just go take a look. You guys should go ahead and look. If the price is 60, what's the quantity? I just go down the marginal cost. I find right here, price or marginal revenue equals marginal cost there. At 60, I'm thinking I should produce 6. And then I ask again, or should I? Well, does price cover average variable cost? In other words, do we shut down or produce? At a price of 60, my average variable cost is 40. So yeah, for sure we produce. For sure we produce, so I'm going to get rid of the question mark. We definitely produce here. Okay, check mark. But then am I making losses or profits? Well, at a price of 60, my average total cost is only 50. So I'm making a profit. In this case, it's $10 per unit. My average total cost is 50, but my average revenue or price is 60. So not only do I produce 6, but I'm also making profits. Okay, so understand those 3 scenarios. The first scenario, price didn't even cover variable cost. So you shut down and produce 0. The second scenario, price covered variable cost. So you produce that amount, but it didn't cover average total cost. So you're still losing money, but you're losing less by producing because you're covering some of your fixed costs and all of your variable costs. Then when price went up to 60, well, for sure we don't shut down because variable cost is only 40 or average variable cost, but average total cost is only 50. And since the price is higher than that, we're making a profit in this very last one, and it's a profit of $10 per unit times however many units. So this last slide here ties together everything we've talked about, and you'll see some of these in Connect. That's it for this segment. It was a long one. Go back and review this last bit for sure to make sense of it. And in the next segment, we tidy up the rest of the chapter and look at shifting demand and supply in the industry and what that does to the overall size of the industry. And we'll see you when we get there.